Hi everyone. Wait till some people join in. So today we're going to be making some sweet potato shepherd's pie in honor of St. Patrick's Day, which is this Saturday. All right, so we're just getting started. I'm just going to open up my saucer. It's a little warm in here. Woo. All right, so if you need the recipe for this, it is the sweet potato shepherd's pie. Head on over to the profile link in my profile, and it's at the top. Head over to my site and you can check it out. And hopefully tomorrow I also will have another fun St. Patrick's recipe for everyone. So if you're interested, just make sure you pay attention tomorrow. And I'm also going to be sending out to my newsletter subscribers once and get that done. So just real quick before we get started with the recipe, we are making today, so sweet potato shepherd's pie. Traditionally, shepherd's pie uses a potato topping, and on top of that, or below that actually, we have a filling of meats. Usually it's lamb. I'm using grass-fed beef. I'm also using sweet potato. Nothing wrong with plain old white potatoes. I talk a little bit about that in my blog post about the difference between sweet potatoes and white potatoes. There's a little bit of a crusade against white potatoes, I feel like, in the kind of health world lately, but they're just as good for you as sweet potatoes. I just like the taste here of trying something different. So that is what we're going to do today. I have my oven set on 400 degrees. We do want to have a nice crisp top to our sweet potato topping. And we want to kind of make that filling that goes inside really kind of rich and bubbly. So I won't be able to kind of show that to you at the end, but if you hop on later, I will post an Instagram story just showing you kind of the finished product, because it will take about 30 minutes in the oven once we do everything on the stove top. All right, so let's get started. Before this, kind of had some stuff prepping, and over here, I can get it undone, I have in my blender just cooling down some sweet potatoes. I peel these, I then steam them in the steamer basket of a double boiler. And what I then did was added some milk and butter. You could also use almond milk. You can use maybe a little oil, but I really do like the combination of butter and nutmeg to a saucepan. And then I just kind of let the sweet potatoes kind of hang out in there for a little bit on very low heat once they're fork tender. The reason for this is that really adding them to the pan and letting them kind of hang out with the milk and the butter let it kind of really infuse the flavors that you're looking for. So I have them, I let them cool a little bit. I'm going to go blitz them in the blender for a second so that we can get nice creamy sweet potato topping that will go on top of our sweet potato pie. And put that on, and I apologize for the noise shortly. Going. While I was doing that, I added about a tablespoon of avocado oil to my hot cast iron skillet. You can see it down here. Again, I always like using cast iron skillets. I just think they're really great to work with. They do get really hot though, so I'm going to be careful not to touch this handle too much, or make sure I have my towel somewhere handy. Let's see, it's over here. All right, so into my pan, I'm going to put 1 pound of grass-fed beef. Again, you can use lamb if you want kind of a more traditional meat filling. I'm working on a recipe using lentils to make this a vegetarian or a vegan option, but today we're going to do some grass-fed beef. So I'm going to add this in. This pan should be pretty hot. Yeah. All right, so that's going to cook up. And again, we talked about this last week when we were doing our meatball or kind of pork skillet bowls. Don't want to touch the meat too much when we first get in the pan. We want a nice crisp exterior so we don't lose all of the really great juices that are in our ground beef. So we'll give it a minute to kind of crisp up on the outside. And while we do that, I'm just going to blitz up a little bit more our sweet potatoes. One thing I'm noticing with my sweet potatoes right now is they need a touch more of milk or some sort of liquid. So I'm just going to add a little bit more before I blend them up. I think I did use a little bit more than the 2 pounds that's in the recipe. good. I'm going to start to kind of break up some of this meat. I can see it's cooking pretty quickly in the middle. That's going to happen because our cast iron skillet is quite large. This is I think a 12-inch. So the center of heat's pretty much in the center here. I'm going to break this up. And again, over here I have my mise en place. So again, everything I'm going to need for this recipe I've already laid out. It took me a few minutes, which is why I was 5 minutes late to our video. But I've laid it out to kind of make it easier for me. It's a great way to make it easier on yourself when you're cooking at home. Alright, and one thing I did do is I just kind of lightly greased a casserole dish. This is what I'm going to put our finished dish into. I love using the Chosen Foods avocado oil spray. They also make the avocado oil that I use for most of my cooking. It has a high smoke point, about 500 degrees, so it does have a nice smoke point. Sorry, I thought to turn that off. It really has no flavor too, so a couple people have asked about using Pam for baking. I use this, it doesn't add any flavor. And I also get this at Costco. It comes in a 2-pack for a pretty reasonable price. So I love this for greasing stuff that I need to put in the oven, or just using to roast vegetables even. It really works great. All right, so I'm going to grab our blender, make sure our potatoes are good. Nice. All right, so we've got nice creamy roasted sweet potatoes, not roasted, we put them in the steam. And I'm just going to leave them over here because we're going to use that for our topping shortly. If you like white potatoes, you could do the same thing with white potatoes. And what's on the menu today, we've got the sweet potato shepherd's pie. And if you head over to my profile, you can get the recipe link, a little recipe in honor of St. Patrick's Day this weekend. And again, shepherd's pie traditionally usually is like peas and carrots. You can certainly use those. I just like adding in some things that I always have on hand. So we're going to add some kale and mushrooms and carrots and onions into our mixture that goes in here. So the beef is almost cooked up. I'm just going to change our view a little bit. Hopefully you guys can see that over here. All right. So, almost cooked up with that beef. And just a point, I was saying this earlier about the sweet potatoes, you know, use what you like. I like using the sweet potatoes here for something different. I also like using the vegetables I have here because I usually have them on hand. So find recipes that you like, and don't worry so much if it's the healthiest, but find ways to add things that you know you'll eat and you'll know you will have access to. So this is just a slight variation on the traditional shepherd's pie. Alright, so that's almost all cooked up. And with adding some of these vegetables, we are adding a little bit more, I would say, nutrition per bite, per se. So we're going to add some kale, which is great, some mushrooms, which also give it a really nice meaty flavor. I love substituting mushrooms in anything where there is a meat component, or using it kind of half and half, because it does have a really great kind of meaty texture and flavor when it's cooked. So, alright, so our beef is pretty much set. I'm going to make like a little well in the middle here. Again, most of my heat is in the middle because I do have this cast iron skillet. And into the mix, I have our mushrooms, onions, and carrots. I'm just going to add that right in and get that cooking. Give it a second to kind of heat up. We're also going to add some garlic, but we don't want to add it right now because it's going to burn if it gets too hot. So I'm going to wait for our onions and carrot and mushroom to cook down, and then I'll add back in some garlic right before we add kind of some of the ingredients for more flavor that we're going to add here. The kale also will cook down a lot, so you don't want to add that just yet. So while I do that, I'm going to get our sweet potatoes into a bowl. So you want to be careful when you add the nutmeg I was talking about earlier into your sweet potatoes before you blend them. Nutmeg can be a really strong spice. I love it, but it's a little strong when you're putting it in something that has this more savory component. So I only use about 1/8 of a teaspoon. If you're not a huge nutmeg fan, you don't have to add it. You could add even a little touch of cinnamon would probably be really nice. People think often cinnamon is more of a sweet flavor, and it is, but it certainly can be used, and it is used in many different dishes for a savory component as well. So that was the oven, and it's heated up to 400 degrees. I'll do this casserole in the oven for about 30 minutes, and then I'll switch it over to the broiler for high for about 2 minutes, just to get a nice crust on the outside. Don't want to burn it, but we do want it to get nice and crisp. If you guys have any questions, feel free, put them in the chat there. This blender is great, but it's a little stubborn to get things out of, so. All right, that looks good. Okay, so you can see these are our mashed sweet potatoes. Pretty smooth for this. We don't want any really big pieces because we are going to make a nice topping on top. So let me stir in our onions and carrots and mushrooms. And again, because this bakes in the oven, you want the vegetables to be cooked, but they don't need to be cooked completely. You want to start that process, but it's really going to finish when we put it in the oven. Okay, so next up, we're going to add our garlic. Again, didn't add it earlier because we don't want it to burn. And I'm going to add some rosemary. The recipe calls for thyme, but I like rosemary as well. They're both really great flavors in this, so feel free to use what you have. Just some finely chopped rosemary. And that's going to smell so good. One of my favorite herbs. So great in cooking, but also just in aromatherapy, everything. Such a great herb. Okay, so we've got that, and then we're going to add about 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. And traditionally you might add some milk to a shepherd's pie. I'm just going to keep it a little lighter and just use some water and thicken it with arrowroot. You can also thicken it if you make a quick roux with some butter and flour. But I'm just going to add the arrowroot to kind of get that all in there. Make sure our tomato paste is evenly distributed. Alright. And next what I'm going to do is add in some of our kale. And kale cooks down a lot, so it really won't be very noticeable once we have it in there. I chose kale just because I usually have it. You can also use spinach. It's going to cook down even more. The other thing with kale, I did chop this pretty well before adding it, just so that we don't have any big stringy pieces of kale, which would be a little awkward to eat, I find. Kind of hanging out in the middle of our shepherd's pie. But you can see it, it's nice and green, it has lots of colors, so it looks good, it smells great. Tilt it up a little bit so you can see it. You see kind of green colors. Alright, it's a heavy pan. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of arrowroot. It's about 2 tablespoons of arrowroot. Again, you can also use cornstarch if you use that. I usually don't have cornstarch. I use arrowroot just because it, if you're making something gluten-free, usually arrowroot is a safer one to use. Some cornstarch has gluten in it. And I'm going to add 1 cup of water. First, I'm just going to kind of mix this all in so it's nicely combined. Okay, and we're going to add the water. It's going to steam a little bit, which is fine. I'll lower the heat slightly. for a minute or two, just till it gets a little thickened. Should put that up a little bit. It's going to thicken up more when it's in the oven and bubbling away, and that's one sign that you know it's also done, is when it's kind of bubbling and you can see it. So it will get nice, and the sauce will kind of thicken up as it cooks. Give that a second. And while I'm at it, I did forget to put in some salt, so I'll do that now. About a half teaspoon. I usually find is fine. And you can see it's bubbling a little bit. Put some salt and some pepper. So it's thickened up a little bit, so what I'm going to do is let that sit for a sec, and then we're going to take our greased baking casserole dish, baking dish, and I'm just going to spoon in the mixture. Once it gets a little lighter, I'll pick it up. Again, this will thicken as it cooks, so we don't need it super thick, just thick enough that you can see it starting to come together a little bit more. We have the pieces of mushroom in there, carrot, kale, so lots of different things. If you like the standard carrots and peas, you could do that as well. Just kind of use what you like and what you have available. Whoop, dropped a little. That's okay. This is real cooking. Okay. So I'm just going to turn this off so I don't set the towels on fire. And just put this all in there. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so we've got our meat mixture into the pan. Just spread it out to an even layer. If you want, you can let it sit for a minute before you put the topping on. You can also make all of this pretty much in advance and let it hang out in the fridge. You can also freeze them. They do great when they are frozen, and then can kind of defrost it while you're at work. And now I'm just going to take our sweet potato mash, place it on top. It's such a pretty color. So as much as I like the standard white potato topping, I don't know, I love the sweet potato. It's so pretty, it's so colorful. Again, if you read in the post though, where this recipe is linked in my profile, you know, they are two different potatoes, so they have different nutritional components. One is not better than the other. They just have different flavors and different things that they offer. So I'm gonna spread this out with my spoon. Kind of just making, you wanna make sure you get a nice seal with the side here. And that's so that when this does start cooking in the oven and it starts bubbling and sort of getting thicker, it kind of expands. So we don't want all of that to come outside and go on top of our sweet potato pie. Okay. So just kind of move it to the edge. Make sure it's nice and sealed. Just like that. A little bit more. Again, this is about 2 pounds of sweet potatoes. I think mine had a little bit more, which is why I needed to add a little bit more liquid when I was blending them up earlier. Okay. Move that a little bit more to seal. Come on, don't be stubborn. It's pretty in a very rustic way, so. Okay, so if you want to, you can make this pretty by doing a little decoration on top. I just like to take a fork, standard fork, and just press kind of in X shapes, going all the way down. Still making sure that there's a nice seal on top. Just giving it a little something. Whoop. A little something extra. Almost there. Open up the sides. Still making sure there's a nice seal. Just kind of getting that in there. There we go. Okay, so we've got our nice sweet potato pie. I'm gonna put it in the oven. Again, it's gonna take about 30 minutes, so I'm not gonna hold you here and bore you. But what I will do is in about 30 minutes, I'm gonna take it out. I'm gonna put it into the broiler set on high, but just watching it very closely, about 2 minutes there. Let it crisp up, kind of get brown on the top. Once it's bubbling, it's definitely done inside. And then I'll post a story about it and show you guys what it looks like, what you should be looking for, and then I'm gonna eat dinner. Hopefully you guys are having something good tonight. If you have any questions, leave them here. I'll hang out here for a minute or two while I start to clean up, answer any questions, and yeah, I'll post back in a little bit with the finished product. Hope you guys make it. Have a great St. Patrick's Day, and have any questions, let me know. Thanks so much for joining. Have a good night.